We are back with Lindsay Robertson. You'll remember him from our section on Cherokee governance and nationalization. Lindsay, now hopefully we can get a quick rundown of how it is legally that allotment came about. And I know that this is a long history, but I wonder if we could start with Crow Dog and Spotted Tail. Could you tell us a little bit about these guys?
Sure. Crow Dog and Spotted Tail were both tribal members, lived in what at the time was the Dakota Territory. They were in their own Indian country. Spotted Tail was correctly believed to be evidently an informant for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and for a variety of reasons, evidently including that Crow Dog, who was a fellow tribal citizen, killed him. He was punished according to tribal law by being required to provide compensation to Spotted Tail's family and heirs in the form of blankets and horses and this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But then I think because there was a federal interest involved, he was arrested by the federal territorial government and subjected to criminal prosecution for murder in the federal territorial court. His defense wasn't, I didn't do it. His defense was, you don't have any right to try me because I'm a tribal citizen accused of murdering another tribal citizen in our tribe's Indian country. And that defense actually, his claim went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the defense prevailed. He won. The Supreme Court said, that's right, the federal government has no jurisdiction to prosecute this guy.
And what we hear of is Ex parte Crow Dog.
The case is called Ex parte Crow Dog. Right?
Okay. Not everyone is happy with this decision.
No, well, the Bureau is especially unhappy, but others in Congress are unhappy too. And the congressional response is to pass a statute. It's not the first statute giving the federal government criminal jurisdiction over stuff that happens in Indian country, but it fills what are perceived to be holes in the existing statute, which was a statute called the Indian Country Crimes Act. The new statute, passed in 1885, is called the Major Crimes Act. It basically says if any Indian does any of the following things to anybody in Indian country, the federal government has jurisdiction to prosecute. And then there's a list of really bad stuff.
Right.
They're all felonies, but they include murder and arson and these sorts of things.
Most things above the level of assault, I've heard.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Well, they're all, yeah.
Somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, well, they're all felonies. So
Okay.
they're all serious offenses. And they're listed, so it's not all federal felonies, but this particular group of crimes. That statute's still in the books, and it gets added to periodically.
Okay, so earlier the court held that states couldn't assert jurisdiction, but now the federal government is asserting that it can assert jurisdiction over Indian country.
Right, yeah. In Worcester versus Georgia, states were told they have no power to assert jurisdiction, but the federal government does, according to the Major Crimes Act.
Okay, and that was what year?
1885.
Not long thereafter we get 1887.
Right, but in between we get 1886.
What happens in 1886?
In 1886, a guy called Kagama, who's a tribal member of one of the California tribes, does just what Crow Dog does. He's accused of murdering another tribal member in the tribe's Indian country. He's arrested by federal authorities and subjected to prosecution under the Major Crimes Act. It's sort of a test run for the Major Crimes Act.
Okay.
And his defense is not, and this goes to the Supreme Court, his defense is not, I didn't do it. It's not, you don't have jurisdiction under the Major Crimes Act. It's the Major Crimes Act is unconstitutional.
Okay.
Because you, Congress, don't have power to subject Indians to federal criminal jurisdiction for committing major crimes against other Indians in their Indian country. Right. The government's defense of the charge of unconstitutionality is, oh yes we do. And the court says, where? Show me where, because the federal government is a government of delegated powers. There's a list of the stuff Congress gets to do.
It's in the Constitution.
In Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, for the most part. And so they ran down the list, and the U.S. said, oh, it's here. Look, here. It says that the United States, that Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with the Indian tribes.
Commerce.
Right. And so that includes, and we call this the Indian Commerce Clause, and so regulating commerce includes subjecting tribal members to federal criminal jurisdiction.
That's a new version of commerce.
Well, it was for the court, which says that's not commerce. we're not seeing it. Now, what's interesting is this anticipates, there's a con law point, but there's a 1995 decision It's the Lopez decision in which the Supreme Court engaged in exactly the same sort of investigation about a federal criminal statute, the Gun-Free School Zones Act. Congress defended it, said, oh yeah, it's a regulation of commerce among the states. And the Supreme Court said, I'm not seeing it. And they invalidated it.
So did I hear you right? The court said it didn't see?
The court said this is not a regulation of commerce.
Okay.
So does that mean that it's an invalid statute? And the court said, actually, no, it doesn't. And it doesn't because Congress has a different basis for legislating over Indians.
Even though Congress or the state did not bring this up?
Right.
The court offers it.
Right. And it's an extra constitutional basis. And it's rooted in that language in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831, in which John Marshall said the relationship of tribe to the government resembles that of a ward to his guardian. Well, in the Kagaman decision, the Supreme Court said that actually means something. And what it means is that the federal government has power as the guardian to do guardian stuff for the tribes, which is to say to pass legislation that helps the tribes or is in their best interest or something like that.
So as long as they're working on tribes' best interests, they can...
Yeah, they have a good faith obligation. And this does that. This is the Supreme Court says, a valid exercise of Congress's power as guardian for the tribes.
Okay, and it opens the door then to other ways in which the lives of tribes might be improved.
Right. No longer does federal legislation affecting tribes have to relate to commerce.
Okay.
With the tribes now it can be kind of anything.